Hi, welcome to the Narrowboat Painting and Training Centre. We've had a few requests on the equipment that we use. So what we're going to do is just go through how I would prepare a boat ready for painting. So how do we get it back to steel, what do we do, and so on. So that's good. First thing though, and it's quite important, PPE gear. Whether you're using a mask which encompasses the face mask as well as glasses to see, or whether you're going to use just a mask to protect you from the dust and then wear some safety glasses. It is important that you wear this stuff. Bearing in mind, you may be stripping back an old boat. You're never quite sure of what has actually been put on there, and once we're talking about getting things back to dust, if you start inhaling this, you can be in some serious trouble. So PPE, very, very important. You only get one pair of eyes per lifetime, so make sure your eyes are well protected. When you start using a scabbler, which is something we're going to use, if you hit welds, the scabbler teeth themselves can break. If that happens, you've always got potential of getting hit by a piece of steel. And we're also going to look at how we dress up welds and deal with that side of it. And then we're going to use something called a wire wheel or a twist knot wheel. Now, you'll see when we use it, they're extremely good, very, very effective. However, as they start to break down, then the wires themselves start to eject from the system, and they, again, could quite easily take your eye out. They travel a distance. So also remember, whenever you're doing a job like this, that the parameters at which you're working in are safe. So people can't suddenly walk into the workshop and get hit by something. So make sure that's that side of it and people are well warned, locked doors or whatever. Or if you're working outside, how far is this stuff going to travel? Is it going to affect, if you're working, say, on a hard standing area, is it going to start affecting people next to you? You don't want to be covering somebody's nice boat in paint chippings and potentially grinding and stuff like that. So think of that as a whole. Most of the equipment you use would also damage your hearing, so make sure you've got an appropriate pair of ear defenders, whether it's earplugs, defenders, whatever. And also, if you're protecting your breathing, make sure that you change the filters on a regular basis. Otherwise, you're going to be in a position where the filters are clogging, it's harder to breathe, and if the filters don't allow air to move freely to you as you're breathing, then you're going to suck in dust around the mask, which is a complete waste of time, basically. So good PPE, and he says with a wry smile on his face, also wear gloves. I say with a smile on my face, I'm terrible for picking things up and forgetting to put my gloves on, and as you can see from the state of my hand, I made quite a mess of it the other day using a wire wheel. Just a quick slip and I've took a great chunk out of my hand. So wear gloves, very important. Okay, to take the main paint off a boat, we would use a scabbler. Now you can see here, I've got a window in this, and we would normally take all the windows out. If you're going to leave windows in, using a scabbler, they do jump around, they do move. I would never try to scabble closer than about 2 inches to a window. If you slip and the scabbler touches the window, they're fairly soft material, it will just wreck it in a second. You've just ripped out a great chunk of the material that the window's made of. So either give yourself a big border, which is the way I would go, or take the window out. Now, we would normally leave the windows in until we've actually took most of the paintwork off, because the windows make an excellent dust protection or a dust guard. Then we take the windows out at the end of the process, paper them up, seal them off, and then we can then take use the scabbler and the machinery to get right up to the edge of the steel and deal with it there. So your choice, you either take them out at the beginning or at the end. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the window itself. There are lots of different sorts. Some have surface fittings, some have clips behind them, some are like this one, they've got fittings within the window. We actually do a course on window removal, putting them back, fitting new ones, repairing leaks, the whole kit and caboodle. It would take hours for me to basically go through all that and the various stuff that you need. So in this case, I can just take the window straight out, double glaze unit, and that's that done. So, the first piece of machinery I've been talking about is a scabbler, and that's where we would head first. That would be the first bit of kit to start stripping large amounts of paint off. The scabbler itself is the unit on here. This is the bit that rotates. It's got a series of teeth, which are all free running. So as the machine's head rotates quickly, that chews, if you like, the paint off. Now, you don't have to use a scabbler. Obviously, on big areas, that's the piece of kit that I would go to first. You could needle gun it off. I'll show you a needle gun in a minute. But this is probably one of the best ways. The other way you could do it is have your boat shot blasted or sand blasted, and then you get it back with a holding coat on or a primered coat, and then you take it on from there. But if you're doing it yourself and you're stripping it down, a scabbler is the way to go. You can hire these, so you don't actually have to go out and buy one. Mine's on a polishing unit, so I can vary the speed. And varying the speed is quite important. Sometimes by slowing it down, you get a much better bite, and it will strip paint off far better than if it's running too quickly. Too quickly, and we end up with it skating over the surface. An advantage of a scabbler is it actually dresses or makes an anchor pattern within the steel as we're doing it. That's quite important, because when you take the paint off, so let's say you just sanded it off, which would take quite a long time in some cases, you would basically end up more or less polishing the surface of the steel. People will often tell you that, you know, a grip blast, sandblasted surface, that's the way to go. It is, without doubt. It will remove the mill scale. This is certainly your second best option, because this will actually, if you like, braid the surface to such a degree that whatever you put on there will stick. Be very careful once you start then to clean the surface up that you don't end up polishing the steel. The whole point is to create an anchor pattern that the actual paint can adhere to. So I'm just going to very quickly pop on some PPE gear. As I've mentioned it, I can't really not use it. And we'll just take some paint off this and you can see where we go from there. Okay then, as I say, gloves, and as I use a full face mask, I find these, they don't really mist up. It works quite nice, so I find it a bit cumbersome having separate glasses, goggles or whatever, so I go for the same one. Now you're not really going to be able to hear much, or you're certainly not about to hear me talking, so we'll get on, we'll scabble a good area, and then we'll look how we dress up the rest after that. So there we go. We've taken off a good proportion there. Quite hard going. This was a test piece we did and used a 2-pack product. On a standard enamel, it will take it off a lot faster. This is being particularly awkward, but no point in just showing you the easy things of everything. But you'd be there forever trying to sand it. At this point, once you've got the paint off and we're down to basically the steel surface, what we've got here left is a residue. Because of the way the scabbler works, the teeth won't actually remove this last bit. Depends on the paints. Sometimes you do get a fairly shiny steel look to it. Because this is a 2-pack, it's really gripping on quite hard. But either way, you'll always get a residue, and the next job is to get rid of that. What we'd use is an orbital sander with about a 120 grit is where I would start. Buy a good quality or hire a good quality sander. If you don't, cheaper models tend not to have the longevity that you want for doing 50 or 60 feet of cabin side. You'll probably burn them out. Bear in mind as well, with orbitals, it's not about how hard you press, it's about letting the machine do the work for you. Now, if you look at paint spec sheets, they'll often say that the surface needs to have an 80 grit abrasion. And you think, well, that's okay, but he's using 120. 120 is fine enough to get rid of this residue. Bearing in mind the scabbler has scratched the surface, as you can see, far more than 80 grit would have done. So we're still creating the anchor pattern required for the paint to stick to. So you can still go over it after you've sanded if you wanted to with 80 grit if you felt you'd polished the surface a little bit. But the trick really is to use your sanding discs, change them regularly. Bearing in mind, once you start working with a 120 grit sanding disc, if you do that for 6 or 8 feet down the cabin side, by the time you're 6 or 8 feet down the cabin side, you're probably using 500 grade because you'll have taken off the surface. So small areas, change the discs. You know, they come in boxes of 100, use plenty. Now, I'm just going to put the hoover on and just show you what this looks like once it's sanded. The hoover acts as the extraction. So as you can see there, in a fairly short period of time, that's back to steel. Let's just turn that off for a minute. And that's what we would be aiming for down the length of the boat. Don't worry that you're not achieving the anchor pattern that it says. If you look closely at that, you can see the marks that the scabbler leaves behind. It's really scoured the surface. We film test our boats when we do them. And I can assure you, when you put the first coat of primer on, a testing machine often shows between 0, as if you put no primer on it, up to about 5 microns, which in the big scheme of things is still, it's not much farther off than 0. Where's the paint gone? Into the surface of the steel. The steel will actually suck it in. People think that the paint sits on the surface, it doesn't, it goes in. By the time you put the second coat on, that figure will jump then from 0, 5, around there, it'll jump up to 35, 40 microns, because then you're painting on top of that first coat, so then you're building it out. It's quite amazing how much steel will suck it in. But that gives you an idea of how well that primer is going to adhere to the surface and the fact you haven't actually polished it. So that's a really good test for it. Now, as you work your way around the boat, again, people have said to me, well, how do you get on with doing the weld line? Because obviously a scabbler is not going to get in there. What machines, what do you use? Well, any tough little areas to get at, you can always then use something called a needle gun. Now, I've mentioned them before, but we haven't actually gone through it, so I thought I'd bring one here with me. Air powered, the needle gun fires the needles in and out, they bounce back, and that then will take the surface off. Now, this one's hooked up, ready to go. Again, you know, people say, oh, yeah, it's a load of kit. You can hire a little mini compressor. That's all I've got sitting in there. A needle gun's not that expensive, but most good hire places, you can get these. Bearing in mind, you know, if you hired a scabbler for a day or two, that's going to strip the boat down. Then you could hire this afterwards, hire things in a stagger rather than hire them all at once, have them all on hire and not actually be using them. They're sitting idle while you're doing something else. So if you plan it, you can keep your costs down and it will work effectively. I'm just going to put on some eye protection and ear defenders, because a needle gun, above all else, is probably one of the noisiest bits of kit you'll use. And again, we've got that thing of, if we're using pieces of equipment which can fire things around and that sort of thing, again, remember that protection, not only for yourself, but for everybody else around you. So I'll just pop this on. So, you could see there how easily the needle gun has just sorted out that weld line for us. Looking carefully, it still has the residue there. The needle gun's done what the scabbler does, which is chip off the surface. We've still got the residue. That still needs to be removed. It's also worth just a quick mention that as I was scabbling, the edge of the scabbler's caught the gunnel edge there as well. You're using heavy machinery on steel, you will mark it. People say, you know, they're worried about these marks in there. If you put a decent amount of paint on, the paint fills all these. There is really no issue with that at all. But what I'm going to do is just show you the two bits of kit now that I would use just to address that steel and make sure we've got an area that we can work on safely. So the first bit of kit I would use, and this is the one that I managed to rearrange my hand with, is the twist knot wheel on a grinder. Works perfectly for this, and you can get right into those edges with it. I will fire up and use it so that you can see exactly what happens and then what we're left with. Now, as a tip, I would always suggest that if you can get hold of a couple of grinders as a minimum, if you're on your own, a couple of grinders, if there's more of you, you've got your friends helping you strip a boat down, then, you know, 2, 3, 4 is ideal. The reason I say this is I've got another grinder there that's got a soft pad on it. We've got a wire wheel here. It's very easy to end up trying to use the wire wheel for everything just because it's on the machine. Whereas a quick swap to a grinder with a soft pad on it or something like that, you're using the best piece of equipment for the job you're doing, rather than, because you've got it in your hand, you'll use this one. If you've only got one, you're going to have to spin this off, put something else on it, and then, oh, you've done a little bit, you want to go back. Human nature is you tend not to do that because you feel like you're wasting time, you just carry on. It's quicker to swap your equipment around. It's a lot more effective. So, as I say, if you've got a couple of grinders, ideal. Again, remember what I said, these do spit these wire spindles out, so it's really important to be well protected. Okay, we're just going to get started. I've mentioned, you know, that where those bits marks are there, so hopefully you can see that a little more clearly. We've just geared the cameraman up with some safety glasses so that he's well protected, and I'll just show you how to dress that last bit up. Right, you saw me stop halfway through that and put some gloves on. We'll leave that in the video. It's all very well saying, oh, look how perfect we are. I'd got my mask on, got my ear defenders, didn't put the gloves on, and that's how accidents happen. And I'd rather you see that we all do that. I should really remember having just mashed my hand up. But as you can see, that's actually cleaned that weld line up till it's shiny. You know, that's going to take paint. There's no old paint left in there. We'll let you have a close look in a second. What I'm going to do now is just show you how we just get rid of those scabbler marks where it's caught the gunnel edge. People panic, they pick a scabbler up. Oh, crikey, I've made marks in the steel. You know, it is steel. We can put all these things right. Obviously, we try not to chew the gunnel up as we do it, but it happens, and it's how you deal with it. The soft pad, we call them soft pads, but you know, it's 80 grit on a grinder. You can dress steel. Be a little bit aware. I'm going to actually just do a little bit down that side of that window with the soft pad, which is quite a good way of just getting rid of that last little bit of paint. But just be aware that you can dig into steel, you can mark the steel, you know, to a degree that you'd end up probably having to put a bit of filler in it or something like that. So go nice and steady with any of these pads that would actually dress the steel. So I'm just going to get that plugged in. I've got my gloves on this time, and hopefully you'll be able to see that. Okay, you can see what we were saying about cleaning that weld up. It's an uneven surface, difficult to get into, and yet we've removed all the paint from that area. No problem at all. These are the little marks that the scabbler caught. I'm just going to put my mask on. There's the 80 grit soft pad on the grinder. So that's what we're going to use, and you'll be able to see how that dresses that up. Okay, so you can see that's just tidied that edge up. And as I say, I just whipped it down that window edge there as well, just to show you how quick and easy that is. So I've only done a very small part of what is quite a big job, but hopefully that's just gone through what you would need and how you'd need to go about it. Basically, you do the whole boat like this. You scabble. Generally speaking, if I was on my own, I'd spend, you know, all day scabbling. But pace yourself. A scabbler is quite a heavy, awkward bit of kit to use. There's no reason why you couldn't scabble 6 feet the cabin side, then sand it, do the gunnel, do the edges, and then go back to the scabbling. So you do a section at a time. By doing it in that way, you're going to make yourself, you know, giving yourself a break. It's not continuous all on one job. I can't emphasize enough how good it is if you've got all the right bits of kit. You could see there, you know, if you can swap from a scabbler to a needle gun to a grinder, whatever's necessary, and it just makes your job a lot easier. As I said at the beginning, you know, I'm up here in the Narrowboat Painting and Training Centre. If you want to come and use this equipment, see how it's, you know, get a proper feel for it, that's what these are for. You know, you can come and do a course with us, you can do it all, you can go away, you can have used the kit, we go through all the painting processes, so you can learn everything you need to know before you go and tackle your own boat. And remember, you don't have to strip them to steel. There is means and ways in which you can just prep a pre-painted surface and then go on to that yourself. So there's lots of different options. We may look at that in another video for you to come and have a look at. But there's a lot to go with there. So I think we'll draw that to an end. That's your steel preparation. The next one I'm going to do is the application of your primers, your undercoats, so we go through that next stage with you. So hope it's been beneficial, and hope you'll watch the next one. Thank you.